Most people think that the first appearance of Hannibal Lecter was in the 1990 film Silence of the Lambs, but they're wrong. The first appearance of Hannibal Lecter was in the 1986 film Manhunter, directed by Michael Mann. Most people haven't seen it. They should. Manhunter is a dark, moody, tense psychological thriller directed by Michael Mann. It came out in 1986 and stars William Peterson as Will Graham, a retired FBI profiler who's pulled back in for one final case. Now, to catch this killer, he's going to have to think like one. And it really presents a difficult time for him, with his family, and with his mental well-being. In this film, similar to Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter is already in prison, and he is used as sort of a resource to help them track down the real killer. In this film, it's Francis Dolarhyde, better known as the Red Dragon, and in Silence of the Lambs, it's Buffalo Bill. So the rest of the film is Will Graham trying to figure out who is this killer, what is his motives, and how he's going to strike next and how to stop him. Okay, let's first talk about what works in the film. The visuals and the music are amazing. It's a dark, moody, cinematic type of film. If you've seen Michael Mann's previous works like Thief or his later works like Heat, Last of the Mohicans, you'll be familiar with sort of his style, especially the shots where our main characters are in the foreground and you have a lot of things going on behind them in the background, sort of making the world feel lived in, feel alive. So you'll be familiar with that. And if you like that aesthetic, you'll love this film. It's very cinematic, it's moody, there's shots at night, there's shots during the day, there's interesting angles, the music is dark and tense and really fits the scene as well. So if visuals and music are important to you, I think Manhunter is gonna delight you tremendously. I think you can't discuss Manhunter without talking about Hannibal Lecter, and of course you can't have a Hannibal Lecter discussion without comparing Brian Cox to Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal, and Red Dragon. Now, it's really hard to compare the two because they're very different. I think Brian Cox plays his Hannibal Lecter a little more realistic, a little more cold, less theatrical. He behaves in the way that you would expect a psychopath to behave in. He's not overly helpful. He has his own agenda, his own plans. He's very dark and evil and scheming. Whereas the Anthony Hopkins one is those things as well. But he's sort of theatrical in the way he talks and his mannerisms. It's almost like watching an actor act versus watching a psychopath exist. I'm not saying one is better than the other because the Anthony Hopkins one is honestly a little more fun to watch on screen in a film. But if we're talking about what's more realistic, I'd probably say a Brian Cox version is a little more realistic in what a real life Hannibal Lecter would be like. Needless to say, they both do a great job. I will say the Hannibal Lecter in Manhunter is not a huge character. He's not on screen all that often. So if you're expecting like a 50-50 like you do in Silence of the Lambs, you're not gonna get it. He's sort of a side piece there to tie Will Graham to the past and also to help him catch the new killer that he's going after. But he's also there just to kind of show the mental difference between a psychopath who's in prison and on the other side, someone who has similar thoughts and feelings, but has channeled them into something good. Let me know who you think is a better Hannibal Lecter. Is it Brian Cox? Is it Anthony Hopkins? Make sure to comment on the video and come back each week as I do more of these discussions. Who is a better protagonist? That's really important in this film because Will Graham is very different than Clarice Starling. Clarice is a FBI rookie. She's fresh out of the academy. She's trying to make a name for herself. And she is basically inexperienced. Whereas Will Graham is sort of the opposite. He's very well experienced. He's retired because this job is having such a huge toll on him, and he's sort of pulled back in reluctantly. And then when he gets in, he's obsessing over the case like he does. Now, I think Will Graham is a more interesting protagonist because of the things that I've mentioned. The way he gets into the minds of these killers, when he goes to see the crime scenes of where these crimes happen, and the way he looks around these houses and the way he stalks through them, the way he goes outside, he climbs a tree and he's like watching through the window and he's imagining what the killer would see before he commits these crimes. And he starts saying the most heinous things possible because he's getting at the mind of the killer. And it's pretty terrifying because you just see his eyes shift and he just becomes a completely different person as he's inhibiting these mannerisms of a killer. And watching him go through these houses where there used to be laughter and children and families and happiness, and now they're just empty rooms, hollow shells of what they used to be, and he's kind of trying to figure things out. It's just more interesting than Clarice constantly going back to Hannibal Lecter and sort of being told what to investigate next. I kind of see Silence of the Lambs as both Clarice's film and Hannibal Lecter's, whereas I see Manhunter as Will Graham's film and Hannibal Lecter is just a small part of it. We also have to compare the two killers that are not Hannibal Lecter. So in this film, we have Tom Noonan as Francis Dolarhyde. We also have him in Red Dragon, and then in Buffalo Bill is in Silence of the Lambs. Personally, Buffalo Bill is my favorite villain out of all of these films. I love the songs he plays. I love his mannerisms. He's so creepy. He's so awkward. He's very interesting to watch. Ted Levine does a great job. But Francis Dolarhyde, played by Tom Noonan, is very sort of creepy, unsettling to watch. He's very tall. He's very strange. The way he interacts with people. And we get to see a lot of him, and we get to see kind of what drives him in that he's trying to form these relationships with people, especially with women, and it's just not working out for him. And he's trying to become something more. He's trying to become the Red Dragon, and seeing that process and seeing him sort of think about and do the things he does is pretty unsettling. So he does make a good villain. I just like the more theatrical, the more entertaining version of Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. Now, this film does not rely on gore or violence too much. It's more of a psychological thriller. I like to compare it to something like Manhunter. If you think about that show, the first thing that you would probably think about is how dark and violent and gory and just nasty it is. But if you go back and watch it, there's almost no gore, no violence, nothing in that film. It's just that the subject matter and the way they discuss it is so unsettling and is so dark that it feels like a much heavier film or TV show than it really is. Same thing in this. You don't get to see most of the kills, and a lot of it is just being with Will and entering his mind as he enters the minds of the killers and seeing the dark toll it's taking on him and hearing the things he says. That's where it gets most of the darkness from. Now, there is moments of violence in the film, especially in the later half and especially in the climax towards the end. It gets extremely violent, which is sort of a staple of Michael Mann's films, where there's a whole lot of lead up and then just brutal violence that comes almost out of nowhere and is quick, brutal, nasty, and then it's over. Similar, it's the same kind of setup that Thief had. I do wish there was a bit more violence in the film and a bit more action early on, and that's one of the things I think could be improved in the film. I think it does take a little bit to get going, and we have to see Will Graham, we have to pull him back in, we have to see his trouble with his family, we have to see him resist, and then finally get into the case. But once he gets going, it's really interesting, it gets really fun, exciting, and you just want to be along for the ride and see how is he going to figure this out, because he and his coworkers, they have all these things that they're doing and all these theories they're running. So it's actually really interesting to see them do police work and try to figure out who this guy is and when is he going to strike again. And I do think we see Dolarhyde a little too much. In the second half of the film, we see him a lot and we follow him as he's courting someone at his work. We just see him a fair bit. We see what makes him tick. We see his house. We see where he works. We see what he drives. We see the jealousy and the rage in him. And I think in a film like this, just like in most monster and creature films and serial killer films, the less you see of the villain, the better, because your mind is going to make it much scarier than the film ever could. It's why Jaws was so effective. You barely see the shark, but when you do, it's terrifying. And all these films like Friday the 13th and Halloween, the less you see of them and you just see them in spurts, it's a lot scarier. So I think we should have seen a bit less of Francis Dolarhyde, the Red Dragon, or maybe seen him in the shadows and you don't really see his face, so you don't really know exactly who we're dealing with. Leave a little bit of a mystery on the plate. I think that would have benefited the film a little more. But this is a great movie. It feels newer than it is. It's ahead of its time. The music's great. The visuals still hold up. It's an interesting story. It's a film that most people, I think, missed and didn't watch, especially if they are into the Hannibal Lecter films or the TV show. I feel like Manhunter is just forgotten. If I'm rating it and comparing it to the other films, do I think it's better than Silence of the Lambs? No. But I do think it's better than Hannibal, Red Dragon. In that case, I would put Manhunter number 2 in the Hannibal Lecter films. And if I'm rating it out of 5 stars, I would give it something like a 4.2 out of 5. So if you like this review and this seems like an interesting film and you have nothing better to watch this weekend, give it a shot. I think you'll really enjoy it. Until next time, stop scrolling, start watching.